I also think that right now it's, I'm aware of it. I think that talking about it to people at the moment, it's a little bit difficult because it's very polarized right now.
Yeah.
And so then what winds up happening is you're not really talking. You're just wind up screaming at each other.
Right.
And that, it just really has no place. I also think that the media, the way that they portray things, they're a little bit alarmist in my opinion. They're not really showing the underpinnings of it or analyzing it in a way that you can.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That you can apply in your own life to change. And I'm always a proponent, so don't get me wrong. I mean, I think, I'm not done with politics. I just don't think it's a really good moment to approach it head on, right? I think there are better ways to deal with it now in terms of really making a change. And I'm always a proponent, and I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but of actually making that change in your own life.
So in other words, politics is not something in society, it's also something inside of you.
Exactly. And so I've been part of activist groups. I've done stuff in New York City with bikes and lots of things, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately what I found is the most impact that I can have is by talking to my neighbors and talking to people around me, and not in ways that make them feel bad about who they are, but just more having a discussion and being informed. And because I do think that people are generally good and they want to do good things for their communities, right? But I also think there's really super endemic problems that have occurred just because of the modern age. I hate to call it modern age, but for instance, like the breakdown of communities, I think is a really, really big problem that is affecting people in ways that they sometimes don't even comprehend, right? And they're reacting to it and don't know what to do, or, it's awful, So I think that that's one way that we can actually make a difference, is by building up communities again based on our own ideas about what they are, per se, right? Because communities take a really long time to build, and they're based on very specific principles. So for instance, the Polish community, right? It's based on this kind of liberation, religion, right? A common culture and history, right? So once that starts to break down, you have to find new ways to make those connections, right? So that we can kind of reach across to each other, across whatever divide that exists, right? Because that divide can be filled with all kinds of, preconceived notions, perceptions, right? And that's the thing that actually keeps us separated and not communicating. And I feel like once we can get to that part where we can actually communicate, the world can only get better, right? But it takes a really long time, because the communication means listening and speaking, not just speaking, right? Or just listening. And it takes time to build the trust. What do you think?
I got to ask you, wait, I want to just, we're starting should we go another half hour?
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. Am I going off on tangents? And
I love these tangents.
sorry, it's like,
I love them.
am I talking too much?
Let's follow your thread. All right. All right. So I would be interested to hear your take on the Polish Holocaust law that was recently passed.
So, so you have to excuse me. I don't know that much. I know that there was a fight between the Germans and the Poles. I know that the Germans were saying, well, it wasn't us who killed all those Jews. It was the Poles who killed the Jews.
Well, that they were complicit. Yeah. And so with the Holocaust laws, there's a right-wing government in power in Poland now. And they managed to pass through the legislature a law stating that it is illegal to speak in a public setting, like on Facebook or Twitter or television, and state that Poland was complicit in certain aspects in the Holocaust. And I was hoping you could shed some light on that. Like, yeah, I know all about that law, and everybody's just like ignoring it, or.
So I don't know. So I don't know that much. So
Okay.
Poland is a thing in of itself. So now I'm part of the Polish community that's here in Buffalo.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
actually really amazing, and I do miss. So when I was in Greenpoint, I wasn't so much part of that community because, as with everything, that the community also has some pitfalls. And one of the pitfalls, in my case, whether it was real or imagined, was, what are people going to think about you if you behave a certain way? It's a very tightly knit culture, but that means it's also very judgmental if you're not like the others at times. So being here, I do appreciate it very much because there's a certain sense of shared, I would say like an ethics and kind of, behavior, social behavior. So it's like, I understand them, right? I understand Polish people when I interact with them. I understand why they do certain things, how they respond to me. It's just easier for me to relate to them somehow because I grew up with them, right? So one of the, we were joking. I was like, maybe I should just go and live in Poland. It's the Eden of my life. Like, I can go back to the homeland, right? I'll have so much money now because I'll be making whatever money I make here, but it's like 4 times what it is there, right? And
you do speak Polish then?
I do.
Okay.
I speak relatively fluently, although Polish people know that I'm not Polish because I don't think like a Polish person is what they tell me when I'm there. But I don't know exactly what that means, so I don't know. So she told me, it's great. Yeah, that's great. Everything's great until you actually have to live there. Okay? And so one of the problems that she points to, which I'm not sure, right? Because I haven't actually I've been there on vacation and it's great, right? Is that people are very divided along political lines right now. So and you can't get away from it. So it's in work. Everywhere you go, people talk politics.
Yeah.
And you can't, so you
can't be neutral.
No, and you get put in a camp.
Yeah.
Because then you're like, you're with those people, you're with, and I have a tendency for me, I don't like that kind of behavior. I find that just automatically, suspect.
Yeah.
If somebody's trying to say you're this or you're that, it's like a Pavlovian reaction that I have, that if somebody tries to do that, I'm like, this is just, there's something wrong here.
Yeah.
Right? Because I honestly think that we as human beings are much more complicated. We can devolve into, these kinds of categories and calling each other names or, putting little labels or stickers. Oh, you're this, here's your sticker. We can do that. You know what I mean? We're humans. We're able to make that decision to do that. But I don't think it's really fruitful. I don't think that it makes any sense. I think it's being silly people, as I would say in the Monty Python sense of the word, right? So I really tried to avoid that. I also think that, personally, I think any group of people or government that comes out and says you cannot say XYZ is problematic, right? I think I'm very anti-censorship, which, sometimes can be a little tricky, right? Because then what do you do about people like the guy who shot up the Muslim community in New Zealand and he had a manifesto, right? So what do you do with that? You know what I mean? What do you do with that? Do you say, hey, some kinds of speech are not allowed, right? Because there's hate speech, there's, right? But then who makes that distinction? It's a really big problematic. And I just think that, it's very difficult to give people in power lots of power because as the very old saying goes, ultimate power corrupts ultimately. So, I would say that I'm kind of like much more a person who would question people's reasoning for doing things. So.
Do you have any questions you'd like to ask me?
I do. I actually wanted to go back and talk to you about community, right?
Okay.
And I wanted to talk to you a little bit because you
have a community here.
Exactly. And you grew up here and I'm a stranger in this community. And I guess I wanted to ask you if you've noticed any changes in the communities. For me, in my community where I come from, it's actually broken down a lot because a lot of people have left. They can't afford to be there. And so I was just kind of curious about here.
I have noticed that when I was born in this house, so here I am, a little boy in the 50s, right? The people next door to me on this side, the Bunchiks, Bonczzyk, they own the house, and the patriarch of the family, Eddie Bunchick, he was a fantastic handyman.
Uh-huh.
So when it came time to put a dormer on his house, he did that himself. He didn't even have people helping him. He cut the roof, and then he raised it with jacks,
Wow.
and then he put sides, like just incredible things like that. And inside of, on the other side of me, the people who own the house, a family, the Mergel family, okay? And across the street, there was the Grayton family. And the thing interesting about the Grayton family was they had a house and a piece of land next door. And Mr. Grayton, he didn't have a single blade of grass. It was all fruits and vegetables.
Wow.
The whole thing, right? People would make fun of them, like you're farmers. But he wanted to live with the food that he raised. He had a little greenhouse in the back and everything. He's a guy who worked at the steel plant, came home from work, repaired TVs, had a TV repair business in the back of his house.
Wow.
Built a house behind his house so that he could rent it out.
Wow.
So, I mean, there were some pretty amazing people there. Okay. Now, fast forward all these years. The house next door to me that the Bunchiks owned is owned by a corporation, and they rent it out. And the house next door to me, in there is living a single person with his girlfriend. It's not a family anymore. Okay? He believes, he just told me this last week, that the end is coming where society will break down and people will be roaming the streets, breaking into your house for food because the scarcity will go up. He is prepared. He has a place in the country where he has non-perishable food, he has water, he has shelter, he has weapons. He says, when the day comes, he said, you should be glad that he said, calls himself a prepper. I'm a prepper. I will come and get you, and I will take you out with me and help you survive. And the person across the street, the house across the street has been torn down. It's all an empty lot now. No more garden. And the house next door to that, where there was a family living, the Urbanics, there's a single man living. And on the other side, there's a single woman living. So I can see how the society has changed over the decades, and it's right next to me. I don't even have to look at the news.
No, it's amazing, right? I mean, it's amazing. That's actually really amazing. And that's what I think is much more interesting than the news, to talk to regular people and kind of get their take on what's going on, what's here, How
I know.
is this?
There's a great documentary about taking Elvis's Rolls Royce and driving around the country and letting people sit in it. And it's a ruse, actually. The reason for the documentary is to talk to people. But if you say to somebody, would you like a ride in Elvis's Rolls Royce? They go, yeah. Then they're in there, and then you can talk to them about how's your life going.
It's genius. It's actually very genius.
So this one woman they talk to, and they go to his hometown in Mississippi. And they're talking to this woman, and she's in a diner. And she said, well, I was born and raised here my whole life. My mother was a waitress in this diner, and now I'm a waitress in this diner.
Well.
And she said, I could tell you how the economy is going if you'd like to know, and I've never studied a course in economics. You see that Coke machine? When I was a little girl, the price of a bottle of Coke was 10 cents, and my mother got paid $1.75 an hour. Okay? So that's $10.75, so it's, what is it, roughly a tenth or more, a 20th almost, right?
It's almost a 20th, yeah.
Okay. She says, now, that Coke machine is still there, all right? It's $2 a bottle, and the waitresses here get $7.50. It's not a 20th anymore. She said, that's the economy in a nutshell. And I thought that's brilliant.
No.
Yeah.
But I think that there's too many politicians and not enough real people. doing the things that are necessary. And I think the politicians don't want the real people there. That's the problem I have with the politicians. And I think that around the world, that is basically the main problem of the world today. Too many politicians only caring about their own comfortable lifestyle. So I noticed you have that postcard of the popes, right?
Right.
And it's like, don't tell them, we'll lose our comfortable lifestyle. All these people want to hold on. I've met in New York City. I went to have dinner with my husband in a nice little, it's a little French place in Midtown East, it's a fancy place. Very good food. We decided to, treat ourselves and go out, right? And there we met a guy who works for the EU. I forgot what his exact position was, but he was on vacation in New York City with his daughter, right? And we just, me being who I am, just, of course, strikes up a conversation because I'm like super interested in people, right? And so he starts telling us that he works for the UN. He works for the EU. He's one of like the, I forgot. It was one of the administrative people, right? And then he proceeds to tell us how spoiled the Europeans are because they want 5 weeks of vacation, right? And kind of starts to go off on them. They don't know anything. They're so spoiled. They want everything. They don't want to give anything, but yet he will retain his 5 weeks of vacation. He's never going to give it up. I mean, he tells us that, right? So he gets to have all the benefits, but everybody else has to, have it the hard way. And I think that's really the problem. I think the regular people know exactly what the problems are, and I think they have very creative solutions to those problems. I've seen people come up with super creative solutions. It's just that they're not allowed to do that. So what is it? I think it's less than 5% of bills that actual people want to get into the Congress get there because there's so many lobbyists, right? So it's just too much. Ironically, I feel like I'm turning into a Republican because I'm like, there's too much of this government administration stuff going on.
Well, that would be an old style Republican.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
I think it actually makes it harder for people to implement solutions. So I think it's mind-blowing, that in the 1960s, the U.S. was able to send people to space, right, with the technology that they had at the time, and they can't create a network today that works, right? The grid in New York City, do you know the grid? The electrical grid is it's unprotected. So I have a friend who was working with Con Edison to protect their grid because anyone can hack the grid and then bye. For a city of that size. I mean, I think it's insane, right? And in the 60s, we were somehow the U.S. was able to send a man in space, right? So I think that the problem isn't the people. I think the problem is the will, right? And the politicians. I think they're standing in the way of real progress because as we kind of started in the beginning, right, they want to hold it back because they'll lose whatever comfort they have.
So the joke that I told about going to see Khrushchev and going to see the Pope was very appropriate.
It's so pertinent.
Yeah.
Right? And so relevant. Right? You couldn't have hit the nail better on the head. You hit it right in on the first try.
Do you want to hear another joke from the book?
Yes, I would love to.
It's not about the same thing. Okay. This is a very strange joke.
Okay.
I thought.
I like strange jokes.
Because when it's done, you say, wow, why would I laugh at this? But here's how the joke goes. A doctor walks out of the operating room, and he goes up to the guy sitting in the waiting room, and he said, I just wanted to tell you that the operation was a success, and I have successfully repaired your wife's heart. He said, I don't know. He said, it's fragile. She'll probably outlive you, but she's going to have a fragile heart, so sex is definitely out of the question. And he looked and he saw how sad the guy was when he said that to him. And the doctor said, I'm a joker. You don't have to worry about that. She died.
I know why you would laugh. It's like the pain thing, right? Where if something's hurting you, then you take a hammer and hit another part of your body because then it hurts more. So it's like, yeah. That's maybe why you would laugh, you know?
So here's my reading of that joke. Everybody, including me and you, lives our life according to priorities, okay? And we don't always profess what our priorities are.
Mm-hmm.
So there was people here, there was a show in Studio A and a show in Studio B, and the show in Studio A finished first. Guy left behind a big bag of this candy called combos, which is cheese with pretzel wrapped around them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in Studio B, there's a guy who had a show, huge, big, 325-pound guy, who he's always telling me he's going on a diet and he's eating healthy, and I should be very proud of him because he lost 5 pounds and stuff like that. So he came down to go to the bathroom, and I said, oh, when you go back upstairs, take this bag with you. I'll never eat it, and I'm sure your guests will love it.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, guests? What are you talking about? And he starts eating from the bag, and I said, but you're on a diet. And he said, you got to understand something. I've never tasted these. If I don't taste them now, I might never get another chance again. So I got to see his priorities, all right? The
Mm-hmm.
ones that he actually lives, not the
Mm-hmm.
ones that he professes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the guy in the waiting room, okay, the doctor got to see his priorities, and he saw what a high priority it was for this guy that he's not going to have sex anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You see? And when presented,
I see.
like death would be preferable
Right.
to that, you know?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
But when I meet people, I like to study not only what they talk to me
Mm-hmm.
about, but what they actually live.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're going to be faced with priorities. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to send them an email, and now they either respond or don't respond
Mm-hmm.
based on has a higher priority in their life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always trying to figure out, like, what is more important to them? Like, for example, I said to my friend, do you want to go on a night walk together? And she said, yeah, definitely. Let's do that tonight. And then later on, I got an email from her saying, I just got too much work to do,
Mm-hmm.
so I can't do it. I
Mhm.
said, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Then I saw her a couple nights later, and I said, oh, what did you wind up doing on Wednesday? I guess she forgot, what I had said,
Mhm.
and she said, my friend called me and said there was a party going on, so I went to the party.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh, I just got to see your priorities. So
Right.
it would, here's the night walk with me. Here's work. It's higher. Here's the party. That's even higher.
Right.
Like, you can't bullshit people with your priorities.
I agree with you. I think it's really interesting that you bring this up because I know that you sent me an email with birthday wishes, birthday greetings it was called. I read that, and then I didn't read the email because I didn't have a chance to, because everything else.
You had higher priorities.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there were other things.
Well, everybody should know you have a child.
Right.
How old is this child?
She's 5.
Ah,
And I mean, the thing about the priorities with her, it's not only that I have to do them, but I do really love to spend time with her. And I'm not going to have very much time. This time that I have with her is not very long. And so I actually, with priorities with her,
yeah.
taking care of her, but also spending time with her, I actually put that above everything else.
Yeah.
Because that time it's ticking, I mean, it's like I blinked my eyes and she's 5,
Yeah.
I was looking at some video of her when she was an infant.
Yeah.
And it goes really so fast,
Yeah.
And it's, I don't know, it brings such joy to my life, and it really gives a very deep meaning to my existence. And I think it's something so important.
Mhm.
So that will always take priority over everything else, which means that which is kind of interesting, right? Because the way I set my priorities then is because it's her, then that means work is the second priority, because it means I have to really provide for her.
Right.
Right, and my
economic
family.
stability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's how it is.
And what I do now that I've realized this whole thing about priorities, is when somebody sends me an email, I immediately will write back to them and I will tell them my priorities. I will say things like, I'm going to the doctor's office today, and I got to get ready for that. My friend Karen has in Sacramento, she has stage 4 cancer.
Wow. Yeah.
So her emails always come first whenever she writes to me,
Mhm.
you see. Or I got to write back to my friend with the broken heart who's suffering from his mental turmoil. I got to take care of that. Or my brother, He's 74. He's got Fox News dementia. So I try to email him whenever he emails me. I don't know how much longer he'll be around. And it's interesting, like you said, the time with your daughter is going by so fast. So I can totally identify the whole thing about prioritizing based on seizing the time.
Right. And I actually want to take a moment to thank you for bringing that up, right? Because when I came in here today, I was talking about my inability to say no, remember?
Yeah.
And this, looking at it from the perspective of priorities, actually makes it make more sense. Because I honestly don't like to say no to people, because I'm just that kind of person.
Yeah.
But if you put it in the perspective of priorities, it's not saying no.
Yeah.
It's about what's important, right? And being realistic about that and being honest about it, right?
Right.
Because I also think with your friend, if she was just honest, and, I think she probably felt bad saying, hey, I really want to go to this party. I don't want to take the night walk with you, right?
Right.
So she said something else, right?
Right.
But in my experience, when people do that to me, it winds up actually like hurting me more than if they just said it in the beginning.
They call that a polite fiction.
It's awful. I find it very awful.
You mean you don't like polite fiction? You would prefer...
Yes.
Boom.
The straight thing, okay, so, if you think I'm going to get upset, just do it. Tear the Band-Aid off. I actually prefer it because then and you don't have a certain expectation or...
Right.
Right? So it's like, hey, I really want to go to this party. And that's what I want to do. And that's what it is. I have a lot of work to do. Just, I like people's honesty more than the polite fictions.
Yeah. So
because I think it signals that you have more respect for your friend, personally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the whole thing about a polite fiction is this. Someone says, come and see my band play. And you don't want to because it's going to be super loud, blaring music. You're not... Okay. And you say, I'll have to check my schedule to see what I'm doing on that day. It's a polite fiction, and the truth would be, I don't like your music, and it's way too loud. So you have to make a judgment call. Mm-hmm. When do you use the polite fiction, and when do you tell people the truth?
I agree.
Now, have you ever been accused of telling someone the truth, and they say, that was hurtful? Why didn't you give me a polite fiction instead?
Of course, it happens. You know what I mean? You misjudge sometimes. You know what I mean? Yes, I have a very good friend who one of the things that annoys me about her a lot is that I have to do polite fictions with her. But I tend to be a little bit of a little biased and say it's because she's French, and the French have a distaste for reality. But anyway, I don't know.
Distaste for reality.
I don't know.
Huh.
I don't know. I mean, I've made it up a bit, so I think that's a very broad generalization about the entire French nation.
Well, I mean, I will take that as just a symptom of her personality, that she has a dislike for reality.
But I've met other French women, so, and I didn't know. It's just funny. It's actually very funny. I find it very comic, and I actually really enjoy it, even though it's kind of a little bit of a slap on the wrist. But, maybe I like that kind of humor. So there was another French woman that I met, and she was putting on this film festival that one of my films was in. It was like the Cat Film Festival. And she's running around. She's really crazed. I go up to her, and I said, man, you look really tired, why don't you take a break, or I can do something for you. And she's like, you never tell a French woman she looks tired. That's just insulting.
Who would know that?
Well, it's like, oh my God. And I just thought it was really funny, that it's maybe it is a little bit of a thing. French women like to be perceived in a specific way, perhaps. I don't know. From my experience, that's what I've observed from the French women that I know, and I always get in trouble with French women in particular. So, who knows?
Right.
I just find it funny as a pattern,
Yeah, I mean, you're just relating your life experiences in that regard.
Exactly. So from my life experience, yes, French women have a distaste for reality. But
yeah, my friend has had difficulties dealing with black people. Mm-hmm. And he said, that I was at work and there was this black guy at work, and he would take the shift, he would take his little chessboard out, and he would just be playing chess and not do his job. And I went up to him and I said, hey, why don't you do your job? And he said, he gave him some expletives, said, mind your own business. He said, so he told the